Welcome to the webinar on integrated reporting. I'm Sachin Joshi from the CII-DC Center of Excellence for Sustainable Development. Along with me is also Sarah Gray from IIRC. Sarah, do you want to say hello?
Hello everyone. Yes, it's great to be on this webinar this morning. I'm Sarah Gray from the IRC and I'm the Markets Director there with responsibility for our networks.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you everyone once again for joining us. We already have a good number of participants, as we can see, and we are gradually, every second we are seeing that more people are joining in. I just want to say at the beginning, before I get into the agenda of the webinar, that we are closing this week on a very high note, especially in this country when we began this week on very high optics. And it's nice to close the week on high substance, which is integrated reporting. So really look forward to the high substance next 2 hours. The agenda today is that we really wanted to introduce to you what integrated reporting is about. CII has been working with IIRC for more than 1 year now. We've introduced integrated reporting to companies in India. And we have created an ecosystem, or we are in the process of creating an ecosystem, which is called the IR Lab. So we will give you an overview of what the IR Lab is, why has CII brought in integrated reporting to India. Sarah will walk you through the details of IIRC, integrated reporting, some technical information about that. And we will also try to bring in Jonathan Lavery, who's also a colleague from IIRC, he's strategy officer, and to talk to you about how globally integrated reporting is doing, and then we'll also come back to some of the network-related details. The way we have organized this is there are 4 segments, and at each end of each segment we will invite questions, and that is a time when we would like to respond to some of the questions that you may have. Another point to mention that if at all we run out of time, we have good 2 hours, but if we run out of time, then the questions which remain unanswered will be taken offline. And finally, this webinar will be recorded and it will be available for future reference as well on the center's website. So let me introduce IR Lab in India. As I mentioned, CII and specifically the Center of Excellence for Sustainable Development in IIRC introduced integrated reporting to India more than a year ago. We worked with IIRC to also provide inputs from companies in India when in 2013 they were in the process of consolidating comments on the draft framework document, and then we submitted our inputs on the draft framework. We had done 2 consultations, one in Delhi and Bombay with the Indian industry. And then once the IR framework was finalized in December of 2013, then we introduced a design framework to the companies. It was around that time that we were also discussing how do we create a business ecosystem and build that experience and capacity in the Indian industry on CII is very convinced that integrated reporting is the next logical evolution in corporate disclosures around the world. And it has been a tradition at the Center of Excellence to introduce some of the latest concepts and good practices so as to have a very long-term view and in turn improve the competitiveness of Indian industry in a global context. we see integrated reporting in that spirit of competitiveness of Indian industry as well. And that is the reason why we have taken the leadership and introduced integrated reporting to India. So what is the IR Lab? First of all, it is a collective of companies, investors, regulators, accounting firms, academics, and even stock exchanges in this country. We currently already have some of the members, and I will let you know which are some of the members who have formally registered, and there are some others who are also on this webinar who are waiting, for some more discussions to happen to confirm the membership. The other objective of the IR Lab is to practice and advocate integrated reporting in India. This we will do ourselves with the support of IIRC and other experts from around the world, and some of that expertise being also brought into India. And most importantly, we will also be a bridge between India and IIRC as an institution globally, as well as there are similar IR networks in many other countries. So we will be a bridge there. There will be a lot of knowledge exchange. Some of it is already happening, and this webinar is also in some way an initiation of that exchange. So here are some of the companies: Tata Steel, Wipro, Birla Sun Life, Mahindra, L&T, ITC, Tata Chemicals are some of the companies that have already confirmed. As I said, there are many others who are in the process of registering. The first meeting of the IR Lab had happened in Bombay on 19th August last year. The IR Lab is actually chaired by Mr. Kaushik Chatterjee, who is the Executive Director and Group Chief Financial Officer at Tata Steel. He is also a council member at IIRC. And it was in that meeting that a lot of companies attended, and we are in conversation with some of those. We are very pleased to also have institutions like the Bombay Stock Exchange. We have the market regulator, SEBI, also a member of IR Lab, which is very important from the policy advocacy objective of the IR Lab. So these are the three key activity areas that we have bucketed for the IR Lab. First and foremost is, of course, knowledge creation. Everybody wants to know what is IR. Companies are talking to us that they would want to prepare integrated reports. They would want to set internal systems and processes in place. So all of that will require a lot of knowledge building. International knowledge exchange, good practices will be a part of this. We are also going to create our own India-specific knowledge, and I'll talk to you about that in a bit. The other is provide hands-on support to companies in preparing IR reports, talk to them about what the importance of integrated thinking, create value innovation models from them, and develop new business models. And related to the point that I talked about SEBI, where it is very important to do policy advocacy, we are also looking at other parts of the government where particularly the Ministry of Corporate Affairs going forward, where we will do some public policy advocacy. But first we have to build the experience in the industry on integrated reporting, take that experience and evidence, and then do appropriate policy advocacy. There will also be advocacy with IIRC as they continue to develop the framework, and some other specific working groups and the technical groups that they have, which Sarah could also talk to us about. As members of the IR Lab, this is what you benefit with. Of course, you have access to knowledge through e-newsletters. We have initiated monthly e-newsletters in December. So we are already done with 2 e-newsletters. The next one is due in February. And we will have papers being written. We will have guidance documents being written. There will be these webinars which we are also planning to do on a monthly basis, if not more. The center will also provide free man-hours on integrated thinking and integrated reporting. We are already committing 20 free man-hours to the members who sign up to the IR Lab. Advocacy I've already talked about, and all the companies who become members of our lab, we will provide them enough branding opportunities through our websites, various publications, and the rest. Just to give you a schematic overview of how it all works, so it is serviced and managed by the Center of Excellence for Sustainable Development. We are the secretariat, we are also the knowledge base. The membership of the companies to the IR Lab is actually dual in terms of being represented by the Chief Financial Officer and the Chief Sustainability Officer. This is very important to the work that happens at the IR Lab. And I must say here that on 19th August, when we had the first in-person meeting of the lab, we had more CFOs in the room than the CSOs, and I take this as a vindication of our pitch to the CFOs. This is chaired by Kaushik Chatterjee, representing Tata Steel, as I mentioned. Mr. Y.C. Deveshwar, who is the chairman of ITC and also the chairman of a Center of Excellence, is also on the IIRC Council. And then there will be different working groups which will be created, which will be time-bound, delivery specific, and each of these working groups will from time to time come back to the chair and work very closely with CESD and IIRC. Let me go to the progress that we have made so far. So I've been talking to you already about the first meeting that we did. If anyone is interested in getting more details of what was discussed and what were the outcomes of that first meeting, do let us know and we will be happy to send you the details offline. We also had SEBI Chairman UK Sinha, Paul Trotman, CEO of IIRC, and Mr. Deveshwar, the Chairman of ITC and our center, speak at our annual Sustainability Summit in September 2014. And I must invoke Mr. Sinha here. He actually gave us a 2-point agenda. He said that CII should create experience about integrated reporting in India over the next 2 years. And he said, after that, you come to me, let me know what is your experience. And he's also told us to send to him a roadmap, which we have told him that the roadmap is to develop the IR Lab and in the next 2 years build the experience in India. IIRC had a pilot program, which the details of which we'll tell you very soon. And Kirloskar Brothers was one of the 2 pilot program participants from India. The other one was Tata Steel. And Kirloskar Brothers participated in the pilot program, and they have shared their learnings from that pilot program also with the members of the IR Lab. People who have missed our first e-newsletter can also write to us offline, and we'll share the learnings of Kirloskar with the wider group. In 2015 really is going to be a launchpad for a lot of activities, all the working groups, regular webinars, in-person training programs, and all of it. So really watch out for the space for 2015. So there are these specific action plans and working groups for each that we are creating, and these are the specific ones. One of the first demands that we have had from the members of the IR Lab is to set up, to create a guidance document so that they can actually start preparing integrated reports. and we will start developing. We are in the process of creating this working group, and we should see some real action happening in this working group beginning March. At the end, there will be a guidance document created for companies in India to produce produce their integrated reports. The other working group is going to be more of a peer learning group. There are some companies who have expressed interest in developing their integrated reports and publish them in this year itself. So this is going to be a peer learning group where we will build their capacity on how to prepare integrated reports. And in a peer learning method, they will also come back and share their experiences, challenges, good practices, what they found to really work along the process of developing these integrated reports. So this is going to be a very live, interactive peer learning group on IR. Some of these activities, Action Plan 3, I've already mentioned. These are a bundle of things that we will continue to do on a regular basis. How this really works is that the annual membership is rupees 2.5 lakhs, or it roughly translates to 2,500 pounds every year. And as part of this annual membership, there are e-newsletters, webinars, in-person training programs, and branding opportunities, and 20 man-hours of free assistance on integrated thinking and related subjects. Membership to working groups is going to be separate in addition to 2.5. There will be conferences, there will be delegations to take to international conferences. Participation to training programs is going to be all pay-per-use and on a need basis. So that's pretty much an overview of what we've been up to at the IR Lab. The next segment is where I will invite Sarah to talk about IIRC and integrated reporting. But I am happy to close this segment for the time being and invite any questions that the participants may have at this stage. It seems there are no questions, so Sarah, may I invite you to now talk about IIRC and IR?
May I request Sarah to please unmute her mic? Yeah, thank you.
Can you unmute it centrally?
No, it's a toggle switch and you will have to click it once again. Yeah, now you are unmuted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sakin. I really enjoyed listening to that, and I know at the IRC we really are enjoying working with everyone around the IR Lab, and I think working together internationally, there's so much happening around the world that it really does make a big difference. So what I'm going to share with you today is just a little bit about who the IRC is and you know, what is IR. There will be a little bit of detail on the nature of the framework and why we think IR is important. if it's possible to hand over to my colleague Jonathan Lebray, I will call on him as he's been travelling a lot recently, particularly in India and the rest of Asia. So I might call on him to run through some of the developments around the world. If we have, I know he's actually, I think, in India at the moment, and we may have difficulty if he's dialing in from a hotel to transfer to him, but we will if we can. And then I will wrap up with a little bit of insight about what we're hearing from the companies who have been actually implementing IR and the kinds of things they're saying, and the impacts that they're talking about that IR is having on their business, on their relationship with investors and external stakeholders. And perhaps to wrap up and link back in with Saki, just to talk about the IRC's networks and in particular the business network, because we're hoping to sort of work hand in hand with the IR Lab so that you have a national network and you're getting really into the detail and the implementation, hopefully, of IR, but you've also got the opportunity to sort of link in internationally and join our international webinars and our industry groups and that kind of thing. And I think there are a lot of organizations around the world that may be like you, just getting started with IR and looking at what the first moves might be and how you can do that in a way that brings the most benefits for your business. So just to move to my first slide, who is the IRC rather than what is the IRC? Because really it is a not-for-profit coalition that brings together all different sort of regulators, investors, companies, standard setters around the world. Our council is very important, and we're working with partners in different ways around the world as well. So many of the world's largest businesses and institutions support our work, and that's maybe from the World Bank to the Economic Forum and Tata Steel, who you know well, and PepsiCo recently started working with us. We also work with organizations such as the International Accounting Standards Board and the US Financial Accounting Standards Board, and along with the large accounting firms internationally, and a significant number of investor institutions, as well as civil society. And perhaps the most important from our perspective companies around the world that we're working with. Some of them are in our networks, and others we're working with, they sign up to receive information, but they're getting on with IR and maybe linking in with national networks, but they haven't necessarily been part of the pilot program or anything like that. And as you can see on this slide, you may be familiar with Professor Mervyn King, who's our chairman, and he was really very instrumental in the beginning of thinking about integrated reporting, and was certainly instrumental in implementing that in South Africa, who's been leading, as it were, on the IR agenda for a few years now. And Paul Druckmann is our CEO. So just to share with you very briefly our mission, the IRC's mission is to establish integrated reporting and thinking within the mainstream of business practice as the norm for companies, I think targeted mainly at listed companies, but also the public sector. Because there are a lot of organizations that are finding benefits from IR, and we've launched a public sector network towards the end of last year, and there were some public sector organisations in the IRC's pilot programme which tested the framework to make sure it was fit for purpose with the people that were going to use it. And it was clear that it can be used in the public sector as well. And so the vision, the IRC's vision, is really to align capital allocation by providers of financial capital and corporate behaviour to the wider goals of financial stability and sustainable development, and to do this through the cycle of integrated thinking within the business and integrated reporting, which is the output, as it were, the end game for the integrated thinking in the business. So let's talk a little about why IR in particular, and perhaps we could just talk about, from a macro perspective. Obviously, the financial crisis and various developments around the world that are, making organisations feel that they have to flex and move with the times a lot. I think IR has a place in that, and also for sustainable development. It's a way of thinking, so you're not focused on just the short term. The organisations and markets and investors and other stakeholders are increasingly focused on, well, not what happened this year, but what is going to happen if we continue on this path. And I think the financial crisis really brought a sort of change of feeling around that. And in practical terms, I think there are lots of reasons why individual organisations might be looking for IR. There was a sort of plethora and a growth in reporting, and it was sometimes hard to see the wood for the trees. And so there's something here around a concise communication of value. And also with that great quantity of information available to people these days from various technologies and sources, that clear focus on strategy and what's going to happen not today but next year and into the future, and reducing the volume, that comes back to the conciseness. And I think really fundamental in integrating reporting is that idea of connectivity, and that goes, it's connectivity of the information itself in what you report, so that people can clearly see the links between your business model, or the external environment perhaps first, and then how that's having an impact on your business model and your strategy to deliver performance, and the way you're measuring that performance with KPIs and other things. And I think if they're connected to each other, that gives everybody confidence that management is doing the right thing, and it can be a framework for management to think about that in different ways as well. And just a few illustrations. Hopefully you can see that slide, and really this is just an illustration of how over the years we really have seen a dramatic growth in the size of annual reports and reporting generally, because of course it's not just annual reports, it's reports to the board, reports to investors, and maybe reports to other stakeholders as well. My computer is going slow again. I'm just going to try and advance it, but there we go. It's not being so responsive. And this is just another illustration, more than the financials, which really just goes to show that in the fairly recent past, the vast majority of the value of our companies, our listed companies, was around tangible assets. It was their cash, their buildings, their products. They were tangible. And in fact today there's rather a different picture, and in fact 80% of companies' value today is intangible value. So that might be all sorts of different things, but related to intellectual capital, social capital, all sorts of things, to the R&D pipeline. And it's clear that because of this change, we really need to think in a slightly different way about the information we report to the market. And I think that's really what IR is all about, helping us do that. And this next slide really shows the sort of mismatch. So, if you look on the left-hand side, which is where reporting is today in very general terms, it's quite focused traditionally on the past performance of the business, what's been happening in the last year, and something about forecasts and plans, but that's not a big part of it. And obviously the board and strategic issues are included in reporting today. But when you look at the way management thinks, usually in listed companies, and the sort of value to the business, you don't generally run the business by looking at the past. Looking in your rear view mirror is helpful up to a point, but it doesn't necessarily guide you to the way ahead. And so I think what we're looking to see a change in is more of a balance. So, past financial performance is still absolutely a backbone of reporting and necessary. But, rather than just sharing what business plans are going forward, I think the focus is on, well, how have those plans been implemented, and what were the results and that kind of thing. And, not just strategic issues, but more detail about the strategy and the governance of the business. And I like to share this slide to when we're saying, why IR and the company perspective. And that's not to say that IR is only relevant to the giants like Microsoft, but Bob Lowe at Microsoft did share a nice blog, actually, giving the company perspective and, why you should care about IR. And I would just share a little bit of his blog, because I thought, it would be true, it could be true of any organization, not just Microsoft. So he talks first about communicating versus complying. A lot of financial executives have complained about the state of financial reporting, and it seems like a compliant exercise has really built up, rather than a focus on communicating clearly about business performance. There's been so many changes in many countries around the world in regulation that it sort of seems to be playing catch up with specific requirements in the regulation, and it's quite hard to stand back and look at, okay, am I communicating clearly about my business and how it performs, and to get out of that compliance mindset. And I think what Bob's been saying is that IR really helps with that transition from, just ticking the box with compliance to communicating in a meaningful way. His other areas, reporting the intangibles, which we saw are so much more important with today's companies than they were, even 15 years ago. And he says, it really helps to look at that. Another area that he identifies as being a real benefit to him is the breaking down of silos, and that by using a framework that helps you think about the bigger picture, the impact of that within organizations is that instead of reporting perhaps being done by a rather separate team sitting somewhere who's responsible for reporting, and they ask other individuals in the business for bits of information and piece it together, that actually there's this kind of change and an integration, and people start working together more naturally in a sort of virtual team. So you get real collaboration within the business around information and reporting of that information for all purposes, including internal purposes. So you may get, you know, investor relations a few years ago may not have known who the sustainability team were, but you know, when I was talking to SAP in Germany recently, they were saying, well, you know, I didn't used to speak to them, now I realize, you know, the information that they have is essential for our business, and I speak to them every day. And you know, that change came about over a period of just 1 or 2 years. And I think the last point about increasing transparency is clear. You know, integrated reporting is a concept that's designed to improve transparency and really help organizations communicate more information about their performance to investors. So that's a little snapshot. There's a couple of reports that came from PwC, one a long time ago actually, which was this one, and there was an interesting experiment done with some teams of analysts. And the first, it was a Coloplast's actual report, and the first team was given the full report, and the second team had a stripped down version. So they were given all the compliance information, all the information required by regulation, including the sort of introduction from about strategy at the beginning, but they weren't given any information that wasn't required under US regulation. And what's really interesting is that the views of the different groups was completely different. So you can see the blue line on the slide. That's where they had the full report, and this additional information gave them certainty, and they knew what they thought about the report, whereas, and as a result of that, the majority of them said that they would recommend buying the stock because they felt that they really understood what the business was about. Now the other group that had the stripped down version, you can see that their views were and forecasts were spread over a wider area. And what was interesting about that is 80% of these analysts with the less complete information recommended selling the stock because they obviously didn't really feel confident about it and didn't have enough information to feel confident. So I really like that little experiment that was done, and it's a good illustration of the need from the analyst and investor side. There's more recent research actually that's come out called Corporate Performance, What Do Investors Want to Know? And I think that there's been quite a lot of challenge around the world sort of over the last 3 years, you know, saying, well, do investors really want integrated reporting? Is there a pull from investors? And what's really interesting about this research is that they went to the market. They didn't talk about integrated reporting per se. They asked them about the content elements, the different areas, you know, such as the ones you can see on this bar chart, the company's overall explanation of its business model. So the business model, cash, how the company creates value, resources and relationships, those kinds of areas. And they asked how important did investors, and these were mainstream investors from countries all over the world, I think there were 65 investors in total, and you can see how they rated the importance of different areas of information, generally quite high in terms of their rating. You know, the lowest is 63% out of, not percent, but 63 out of 100, you know, quite important, to up to 88, which they consider very important. But then they were asked, and how do you rate the quality of information you currently receive in this area? And you can see there's such a gap and such an opportunity to meet that gap and help investors to understand the business in a clear way. So I hope that's useful to you, and obviously there is more information on these reports that we could forward you links and things after the webinar, I'm sure. And just moving on, you know, what is IR? I think we'll go through this section quite quickly, and I'm sure there will be materials for you to look at your leisure later on. But I think it's just worth running through some of the basics about IR. I think really it brings a new focus to reporting, and it brings financial reporting together with other areas of reporting. But importantly, it has a kind of lens of strategy, governance, performance and prospects. And the result is a concise communication about value. And so I think that shows you how it is positioned. And I think it's also important to understand the difference between integrated thinking, reporting and an integrated report. And I think one way of looking at it is and I don't think you can get an integrated report or a good integrated report without doing some of the integrated thinking internally. And the integrated reporting is the sort of processes and the systems that you use for all your reporting. And an integrated report would be a single output. And I think somewhere I had some thoughts as well on telling you a little bit more about integrated thinking, but I think I will leave that and sort of make progress through the slides and maybe come back to that if there are any further questions on integrated thinking at the end. As well as that, I think the aims, you know, what is IR and the aims of IR. There are quite a lot of ways of showing this, but I thought this was one way of helping to summarize it. And obviously one of the first aims is efficient and productive allocation of capital to improve the quality of information that's available to providers of financial capital. Also, it's to promote a more cohesive and efficient approach to corporate reporting that draws these different strands of reporting, whether it's financial, social, environmental, you know, brings them all together and communicates the full range of factors that materially affect the business. So, you know, there may be some capitals that you look at and you think, actually, that's not something that affects our business, and so you wouldn't necessarily report on all the capitals, but you would report on the ones that you thought were important for your business. Clearly, IR is also about enhancing accountability and stewardship for the board for a broad base of these capitals. And the full list, just while we're here, is financial capital, manufactured, intellectual, human, social and relationship, and natural. And finally, support for integrated thinking. I'm just going to hand back to someone to look and see if there are any questions while I just grab myself a drink of water. Thank you. As we're going along, if any of you have any questions, it would be great if you can type them into the questions box and send them off so that my colleagues and everyone can be looking at them and we can get them lined up for the end of the presentation. And just to look in a little bit more detail about the framework itself, I think it's important to just point out that there are content elements which I think are probably quite consistent in most countries with the areas of reporting that are already required by regulation. There may be some differences of emphasis, but there's often a lot of overlap there. And the guiding principles to IR, I would say that these also are often in the corporate governance codes and in various pieces of guidance. The guiding principles, such as conciseness, are things that are encouraged already in national jurisdictions. And it's probably the fundamental concepts that put a slightly different perspective on these other things and sort of help to give a broader, longer-term perspective with integrated reporting. But I think it's important to say that, you know, the idea is that this is not something that is you have to do every element straight away. It's, for most people, it is definitely a journey, and the principles of IR, it is a principle framework so that it can be fitted in usually, and certainly I understand in India, with the local requirements to just help add value and context to what companies are doing already. So the fundamental concepts are value creation for the organization and for others, the capitals, and the value creation process. So the value created for the organization and value created for others, you can see that little diagram just starts to give an illustrative example of how you start to think about the activities that create value, the relationships that create value, and the interactions and dependencies that create value, or indeed destroy value as well, because that can be part of the picture. I think with the 6 capitals, it's an interesting combination, and as I said, they won't all apply to all businesses, but when you start to look at how they interact with each other, you really get a lot of insight for the business, for management, as well as for investors and others externally. I wonder if you're already familiar, you may have seen what we like to call at the IRC the octopus diagram, which illustrates this value creation process. And you can see on the left the different inputs to the business, the financial capital, the manufactured, intellectual, human, social relationship, and natural. And then in the center, the business model and the business activities and outputs. And I think importantly, IR talks about outcomes. So, you know, for example, it's not just that you manufacture a car, which is an output, it's the outcome of having a car for the lifestyle of the person that has it. You know, what is the impact on society, on the environment, on, you know, on all of us by making that car. And it's those considerations that need to be thought about, and the outcomes in a structured way based on those capitals. So the guiding principles, hopefully you can see that. You can see that they're straightforward, they will be familiar to many of you. We talk about a strategic focus and future orientation, connectivity of information, stakeholder relationships are part of the principle, and the materiality for your business, and that there are, you know, tensions between some of these. So, you know, we talk about conciseness, but also completeness, and, you know, that's a struggle. It's possible, but, you know, the companies that have been implementing IR for a few years now, you know, there's a real tension between those two things, having broader reporting, but at the same time being concise with a broader scope of information. So these guiding principles, they underpin preparation, they inform content, and help you with the presentation of information. So in terms of the content elements, I think many of these, you know, sometimes there's different terminology, but many of these content elements will be familiar to you. And that was the last slide on this section. And I think the important thing about when you're presenting all these different areas is to be able to do it in a way that tells the story of the business and joins it up and communicates it in a clear way, so that people can see you know, how the external environment is affecting the business, and how the business model might be being evolved in response to some of the things that are going on. You know, some of what we call mega trends in the market with aging populations. Certainly in the UK where I am, it's an aging population, and new technologies and that kind of thing. You know, there's a real need for businesses to be more agile. And when people can see the story and see how the strategy is adapting and understand the performance against that strategy, and have an idea of the outlook and what's coming up, there can be a lot more confidence in reporting. So I think at this stage I will hand back to the organisers and see if my colleague Jonathan Lebray is on the line, because it may be possible for him to talk about some of the momentum for IR around the world.